Let's go to line number 10 and say good morning to the PC member for Lab West, the Minister of Transportation and Works, also the Minister responsible for Labrador and Aboriginal Affairs, Nick McGrath. Good morning, Minister McGrath. You're on the air.
Good morning, Paddy. How are you this morning?
I'm fine this morning. You?
I'm fine, thank you.
Minister McGrath, you're being dogged by what is a real serious matter, whether it be the optics, the reality, and or the procedures handling the contract issue with Humber Valley Paving and the return of the bonds. The answers that have been coming from you so far, sir, are not being well received by the electorate and or me, as you've heard my comments on it. You speak to the professionalism that you and your department take very seriously. How can it be described as professional not to have a paper trail to accommodate what is a very serious matter in incomplete work and the return of bonds that are there to protect the ratepayer or the taxpayer?
Well, Paddy, you're saying there's no paper trail. In actual fact, there is a paper trail, because when you negotiate a contract, then what comes out of it is a paper contract, and we have the paper contract. Attached to a paper contract are the copies of the bonds that are negotiated to go with the contract, and they become part and parcel of a contract. And then if you're going to enter negotiations then to terminate a contract, or you go into discussions to try and find a common ground where both mutual parties agree to terminate a contract, then you have a letter of termination, and that is a paper trail. So I'm not sure I agree with you that there is no paper trail. As for whether there's recordings of every conversation that takes place in going through that negotiation, no, there isn't, but there is a paper trail.
Well, I do have a copy of the letter that was written to Mr. Coleman as penned by Gary Goss, Assistant Deputy Minister in your department. But the conversations that are had here, we know government is about paper, and it's about the documentation of all these agreements entering into and out of contracts. So the paperwork you speak of, is it any more extensive than this copy of the letter that I have in front of me?
Well, again, in the contract, and with the contract, the bonds are part of that. And as I said, that is what you're bound to. So that's what we work with. I think this story has lost a little bit of the concept of exactly what the importance of and the urgencies were. The importance was to get a job completed on time and on budget, and the urgency here was, and I guess I understand the demographics coming from Labrador, and I understood the demographics of the fire because I was there during the whole process of that fire, and I saw the damage that it did to business. So when this was brought to our attention and we were approached, we had an urgency there to try and get this 60 kilometers of highway completed. It's a contract that was started. We wanted to get it completed. So I guess the urgency was we were getting all of our tenders out, and we were about to release a tender on the other 80 kilometers plus another 5 kilometers. So the urgency was, we either move on this now or we're going to miss a window of opportunity.
Couldn't those things be done concurrently, though, Mr. McGrath, whether it had to result in litigation or the return of the bonds or what have you? Couldn't it be retendered, and whatever potential dispute arose from Humber Valley Paving's issues, couldn't they be done at the same time?
It could be, but you would be looking at major delays. Probably it could be upwards to 2 years delay before you could have something done. And then if we called in the bonds, it would happen that they may say they had perfect reasons to ask to be terminated from the contract, and therefore the bonds may not be available. What I looked at, and I think the message that I need to get out to the general public here, there's a perception being given here that there's $19 million was given back to a company, and that's unfactual. What was given back, because the bonds are part of a contract, so their insurance policies put in place. If there's still $7.3 million on the table for this job, for this 60 kilometers to be done, Humber Valley Paving was only paid for the exact amount of work that they had completed, and all their warranties and everything are still on that work that's completed. So I have $7.3 million that still has to be used on that 60-kilometer project. So if I were to say I'm going to hold this company to the contract, and then I went back and let's say a bid came in, and I'm using these numbers just for numbers. Let's say I re-tendered then, and number one, I can't re-tender something unless the contract was terminated. So the choices, the options that were here was that we either mutually agree to terminate or HVP would terminate before I could retender the work.
But of course, if you dissolve the contract and it becomes a dispute, that is technically the contract has been done away with, and you retender for a new contract. All that stuff can be done at the same time. Yes, my understanding of business. One question though on the paper trail and whatnot: when a company is involved in a contractual obligation with the provincial government, did they approach you simply with a telephone call or any emails or letters requesting some conversation, further negotiation on the contract? And if was there?
There were telephone calls, yes.
Just telephone calls, so no emails, no letters.
That's how it started. No emails, no letters, and then you sit down and you negotiate. And when you either come to an agreement or you don't come to an agreement, and then there's a letter to that effect.
When it comes
all the professional team is around then. Our legal advisors are there with us. We have a full team of legal advisors. We utilize all of that to make sure that what we're doing is legal, is above board, and most importantly, is for the best interest of the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. That's the message I keep getting out there. I want to get this job finished. I want to get it done on time. I want to get it done on budget. And I also want to protect the employment of Newfoundlanders and Labrador.
In that protection, though, doesn't that, I guess, protect yourself, protect the department, protect the company? It's just, I think, we're all at a loss as to why that didn't include any documentation of a request by the company. And if and when in this contract there's a clause that allows for act of God, force majeure, why didn't you ask for them to execute or to implement that clause for a way out, which would have required lawyers involved and a real paper trail, a documentation of the reasons offered by Humber Valley Paving why the job couldn't be done? Isn't that the rational and professional thing to do, sir, is to make sure you stick with the clause in the contract and not just telephone calls? So if there's a clause that says they have a way out based on things like the fires, why didn't you ask them to put that in writing so that it could be negotiated based on documented fact, not a telephone call?
Well, Patty, there's a letter actually that, because if you read the contract, and I'm not sure if you have a copy of the contract or not, if you read the contract, there was a letter after the fire that asked for an extension on the contract. So that paper trail, I mean, what we're talking about are two different things here. There was an extension put there. Once they realized that how much money at the end of their fiscal year, they realized they had major losses in revenue because of the effects of the fire and other conditions that happened in that particular summer of 2013. So then, when they sat down and they look at the year end and they realize the losses that they had incurred, they say then, in order for us to complete this job, it's impossible for us to make money. We're going to incur more losses. That's when the conversations start. Is it possible to terminate this contract? My window of opportunity was very small, and that's why I had to act with such urgency to get that tender re-tendered. And that was the rationale of that. And I think I made the right decision here.
Did you not wonder aloud? Because, I mean, all the timing questions here make this more curious than if it was just a contract negotiation between a private company and the provincial government. So if the paving was supposed to be done in the middle of 2013, how all of a sudden was it out of nowhere, realization of the company and the government that the work was not done? They came to you in March or February of this year, as opposed to when they had problems with the fires and all the issues in 2013 when the work was supposed to be completed. How do you justify that gap in time where everybody knew, both parties knew, that there was a problem with satisfying the obligations of the contract?
First of all, I have to correct one thing that you said there, because you said that work was supposed to be completed in the summer of 2013, and I just stated to you that after the fires and Humber Valley Paving realized the setback that was set by that on July 11th, which is very shortly after the fires, they were given a one-year extension, and they had applied through a letter for July. On July 11th, that letter was sent asking that we give them an extension. We granted that extension in September.
But then, of course, no paving season has come and gone since then. So from the grant of the extension of time based on the fires, what have you, right till March, where they go further than looking for extension and just say that they cannot complete the work based on the loss of the unavailable profit and what have you, and the reasons offered. So how do you justify that timetable too? Because there's no payment being done.
But I know that when, at the end of the year, when they looked at their costs that were incurred throughout the year, and they realized the losses, and as I said, I was in Labrador West, and I watched those tankers sitting on the side of the road while 27,000 hectares were burning. So I saw the reality of what was there. The point, I guess we're digressing a little bit, because the whole point of this is not, there's a story being made outside of what has happened. The bottom line here is that we were approached as the government by a contractor that they financially could not continue with a contract. So as a minister, I have to say, what do I do? Do I hold them to the contract, hope to collect on the bonds, or do I move forward, make a mutual agreement where I think this work can be completed on time, on budget, by retendering? And what is the best solution? That's the two options that I had, and I think we made the right option.
Part of the conversation is that you didn't deal. You say you've never met or spoke to Frank Coleman, and there's some of that is prefaced within your role as the Minister of Transportation and Works. Are you saying that you have never, ever met and or spoke to Frank Coleman?
No, and again, this is where it's been taken out of context.
No, I'm asking serious, just a straight question.
I have met Frank Coleman, yes. But I have never discussed this file with Frank Coleman. Never, ever.
Can you forward along some of these things that you're saying are documented, like the letter from the company based in from July after the fires, what have you, and the request for extension and the paperwork that accompanies granting the extension? Can you forward that along to us so that we can have a look at it and put it in the pile so we can consider it and give it the weight that it deserves?
Sure. What I'll do is I'll check with my legal staff, and whatever we can send off to you, I certainly have no issues with
I'd appreciate that. And so you say he's dealt with Gene Coleman, but then when asked about Mr. Gene Coleman's role in this, you say that you know, for the second time only in your role as the minister, you got involved once early in your tenure in the portfolio, and then this time. So why? Couple of questions. Why did you have to get involved this time if it was only the second time ever as your role as the minister?
And again, there's a little bit of misunderstanding there, because you're only getting a snippet of a conversation. There was a whole interview where I said this is the second time that I've had to deal with negotiations for termination of a contract. When I say I as the minister, my whole department was involved in this.
Oh, sure.
I deal with contractors every day. This is only the second time since I've been the Minister of Transportation and Works that I've had to deal with negotiating for termination of a contract where there was a mutual agreement.
Okay, and so you say you dealt with Gene Coleman as opposed to Frank, and that's fine. What role did Gene Coleman play? Was he in a position as director and or owner and registered to be in a position of negotiating this contract at the time?
Gene Coleman was a spokesperson for the company.
In what role, though? Because anyone can say they're a spokesperson.
I have to emphasize, sorry, Patty, to cut you off.
That's
there.
Okay.
I have to emphasize that I deal with a company, so it doesn't matter to me if it's Paddy Daly or Gene Coleman. And again, that comment was taken out of context, and it was said on Open Line last night by Andrew Parsons that Minister McGrath said that he did not know that Gene Coleman was Frank Coleman's son.
Right.
What Minister Nick McGrath said is that it doesn't matter to me if it's Frank Coleman's son or not. I have to deal with a company.
Yeah, but it matters to a lot of people, though, because of the timing once again. Here we have the incoming premier, the leader, soon to be technically installed as leader of your party, incoming as the former president and majority shareholder of Humber Valley Paving. There's an issue with the contract, and then we're all supposed to just accept that there's arm's length negotiations. Frank had nothing to do with Gene in this kind of conversation. Don't you see how you set yourself up really to be the fall guy here? Even if everything is above board, don't you understand how we all seem to think that there's something fishy going on here?
I can see where people can make it sound like there's something fishy, but I also see that the whole process of this story is, my premise is that I have to get the job done. I don't want Labradorians, especially, it's coming from Labrador West or from Labradoris that are depending on that section of highway to be finished. They've waited long enough. I don't think they should have to wait another 2 or 3 years while you're going through some type of litigation. So I feel the best decision was made, and that was to retender the work, get it done this year on time, on budget.
So elaborate that point for us, though, sir. Can we not have had a dispute with Humber Valley Paving, and us being the government, could we not have had this contract dispute and potential litigation over the return of the bonds, what have you, and retender? Like, why can't that be done concurrently?
Because the bonds are part of the contract.
But can't they just be held up in dispute, and you can't retender? That's the legal. This is a question because I don't know the answer. I'm asking just as a question.
I'm going to try to give you the answer. The bonds are part of the contract. Before I can retender any work, the first contract had to be terminated. And that was where my window of opportunity was very tight, because I was getting ready to send out the other tender on the 80 plus the 5 kilometers. So if I didn't move quickly, if I had to wait to go see whether we were going to have to use the bonds, then I would have lost that window of opportunity to retender that 60 kilometers. I cannot retender while there is already a contract in place.
Many people wonder aloud whether or not it's government's role to protect the viability of a business in the private sector, where there's a competitive marketplace for tenders on road work and what have you. But when we have these bonds in place, I mean, Tom Osborne this morning called the program, and he said, and I think this is an interesting part of the conversation too, part of those bonds for the suppliers is the protection of them, the small retailers, whether it be for fuel and otherwise, and the release of those bonds meant that there was no protection afforded by the government to these people who are still owed money, potentially in conjunction with how Humber Valley Paving tried to execute this contract. So why not even protect these people, if indeed you're saying you're protecting the best interests of the people of the province? That must include the suppliers of the company. Why not protect them?
I agree 100%. Now, Mr. Osborne is not 100% correct there, because although the labor and materials bond does protect, is in place to protect the service people and small companies, before you can avail to a labor and materials bond, you have to exhaust all other means. One of the major means for that is the mechanics lien holdback. The mechanics lien holdback is still in place.
So they have to do all of that before you can protect them with the bond?
Yes, all of that has to be exhausted. So if a small company were to come and say, we're owed money by a company and we want to avail to the bond, first thing a bonding agency will say, have you exhausted all other means of trying to get your payments? One of those means is a mechanics lien. You have to exhaust that first. The mechanics lien is still in place.
Can the bonds be released in part, or do they have to be released in whole?
The bonds have to be, once you terminate a contract, the two bonds, the performance bond and the labor and materials bond, are part of the contract, so they terminate automatically.
So inside the 9.5 million, there's no way to release portion of bonds. It has to be released in full or in part. What's the rule on that?
No, the rule on a bond, and that's a whole different gamut, and that's what I was saying earlier. We still have $7.3 million that has to be used against this project for the 60 kilometers. So let's say the retender came in at $7 million. Okay, so it's actually coming in cheaper. Now, the bonding agency says, well, there's nothing for you to apply against because the job is paid for. If it comes in at 7.35, they say, okay, we'll give you the 5.
But of course, then we have, like you said, if all opportunities to get the money from Humber Valley Paving are exhausted, mechanics, liens, and otherwise, then the bond will be there to protect them. But the bond's no longer there, so that means the provincial government has no protection afforded to these small retailers because the bond has been released, so they're on their own now.
No, Paddy, they're not. They have the mechanics lien.
Well, I mean, so far as government's role goes.
Government's role part of government's role is to make sure that mechanics lien is there.
Okay. What role does, outside of your department, what kind of conversations are had with the Premier and this stuff? Is the protocol and the appropriate procedures in-house? Does that mean that as the Minister of Transportation works with this kind of potentially politically contentious issue and a matter of significant dollars and incomplete work, do you speak to the Premier on this one? Does he give you the go-ahead to release the bonds and to dissolve the contract? How does that work?
No, that's done through the Minister's office. And the first conversation, actually, that I had with Premier Marshall on this was on April 28th. This is an in-house issue. I feel, and I stand by it, that the right decisions were made because I'm protecting the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm protecting employment. I'm getting a job done. I'm getting it done on time. I'm getting it done on budget. And that's my major concern, is that I can do that with as least effect as possible.
And part of your concern as well has been put forward by your government under Premier Marshall in particular is about the openness and transparency and accountability. Given all of the issues surrounding this, the timing, the questions, the political issues that surround it, is it time to call in the Auditor General? When will you do that? Because that's the one comfort we have. When we take it out of the politicians' hands, take it out of the machine that is the Department of Transportation Works, and allow the independent body that we all have great faith in, the Auditor General, to have a look and let us know exactly what happened and give us his opinion on it. Will you call the Auditor General in to do that?
It's not my place to call the Auditor General, Paddy, but I have to say that the Auditor General can come in at any time he pleases. He has full access to anything at all concerning the House of Assembly or any department within government, so he can come in whenever he feels it's necessary. He certainly has 100% access to come in and do whatever he feels is necessary.
Do you think it's prudent to make a public statement that you think it's time just to, whether to be cover yourself, protect the party, protect the government, protect the people of the province? Do you think that you can appropriately say right now you think it's appropriate for the Auditor General to be having a look at this, not upon his convenience or his timetable, but for you to say, you know what, it's time for someone else to take a look at this beyond my statements, and you call him in yourself? It's not inappropriate. Do you think you should do that? Or will you do it on this program?
I don't think that's necessary. I think the Auditor General has full access, and the Auditor General knows that, and I think it's important that the general public know that, and I have no issues with the Auditor General coming in. I know everything that has been done here has been done above board, and it's been done in the best interest of the people of Newfoundland and Labrador, and I stand by that, and I feel confident that the right decisions were made when we made this decision.
There's some issues surrounding the original value of the contract in the first place. So it was for 80 kilometres at 19 million. They're the right numbers, right?
Sorry, you said 80 kilometres and...
At $19 million, is that the value of the contract initially?
Yes. Now, remember, it's not just 80 kilometres to pave.
Guardrails and all the prep work and the like. So when the amount that was done and paid for, two questions. How do you evaluate exactly what was completed and attach a dollar amount to it? Because we have all sorts of quotes coming from around the country about how much it costs to pave a kilometre of road, especially when all the prep work and guardrails need to be done. People say that the remaining work that was undone is about $18 million worth of work, yet the original contract was only for 19. They did X amount. So how do you gauge appropriately how much you owe the company? And how do you justify what people are saying about the undone work, the incomplete work, and the value of it?
Yeah, we have professionals in the department, engineers that break down all of those costs, Paddy. And I mean, when you look, you had an 80-kilometre stretch of road that had to be constructed and upgraded, prepared from the bottom level up to prepare it, and everything has been done except paving of 60 kilometres of the 80 kilometres. Every other piece of construction work has been done. So common sense would tell you that that's not just 20% of the work done.
Yeah, and that's why I ask out loud, because there's so many numbers flying around that it's becoming mind-bending. This is a point made by someone on my Twitter feed, and I think this is an interesting point regarding the Auditor General. When the government saw fit and prudent to invite them in on the spending scandal, it was done. There was some serious malpractice and bad behaviour and criminal behaviour uncovered. So in this instance, so it does away with the perception of what may or may not have happened. Why not afford the same invitation based on the protection of the people of the province, protection of you and your department? Why not invite them in on this one, just like the spending scandal? Because people have legitimate concerns with timing and optics and the money and the incomplete work.
And people are certainly entitled to their concerns, and I hear them loud and clear. And as I said, when it comes to the Auditor General, he knows what his accesses are, and he's more than welcome to exercise them in this case.
And I don't know if you heard my comments at the beginning of the show, Minister McGrath, so I'll say them to your ear while we're here. From my perception of this, when it comes to timing and what the Premier did last week with the shuffle of the Cabinet and what have you, my assertion was that Minister Sullivan was taken out because she was unable to face the questions based on the 180 radiation in the Corner Brook Hospital, so she was the government's spokesperson for the rationale to not include it. She was removed because they did a flip-flop or a reversal or a change of heart on it. They knew, you guys knew this was going to be an issue for public concern and questioning, and yet you were left in the role. I said you were thrown under the bus and made the scapegoat and thrown to the wolves. Your comments to that?
I disagree that I was thrown under the bus. I take my role here as the Minister of Transportation Works, and and Labrador and Aboriginal Affairs very seriously. I try to my utmost to do a professional job. I think I am doing a professional job, and I feel that the Premier is very pleased with the work that I'm doing, and therefore he's confided in me and trusts that I'll continue to do that work. I don't agree with you that we were aware that this was going to be a big contentious issue. I think this is being turned into a big contentious issue, and I'll ride that wave, and if I survive, I survive, and if I don't, when I go home at night, I'll lay my head on the pillow, knowing I gave 100% to the people.
It's part of the job, and you know that as well as the rest of us do. Can you describe the circumstances for the first time you intervened in the contract issue? You say it was at the beginning of your tenure. Can you tell us what was involved in that specifically?
Well, I won't get into heavy details, but basically, and again, you had to be part of that whole dialogue that when I say it was the first time, because you've got 7 or 8 reporters stood up in front of you drilling you, and you're trying to hear everything and make sure you've got to have the answer before you get the question. And that's part of being in a scrum, and I understand that. But when you're asked a question and all these questions are coming at you, the point that I was making in the whole dialogue of the scrum was that that was the first time that I was directly involved in a negotiation to terminate a contract. And then I corrected myself and I said, no, when I first got into the department, we also terminated with mutual agreements to terminate a contract.
What were the circumstances there? Was it something similar, act of God or force majeure clauses being executed, or what was it surrounding?
No, and the surroundings of the first one that was mutually agreed to was that the work just couldn't get done within the time frame, and it was an emergency job. It was a job that needed to be done. Because the job didn't get done, then we had to go in and do emergency work and cost government extra money, and we felt that that was grounds to we went to the contractor and felt we should retender this job. It shouldn't be just put in a back pocket.
Just to summarize and to clarify things you've told me here today, the paperwork that you say exists regarding the letter for request for an extension from Humber Valley Paving, the correspondence then from the government to them, and all the timing, all the paperwork available here, you say you'll speak to the legal team and you'll make that available to me?
I'll do my best, yes.
I appreciate your time and the conversation this morning.
Okay, Paddy, I got to say I thank you for listening to me, because you've certainly given me a lot of time, and I appreciate the opportunity to get the real message. There's one thing that as I said, and like I said, I'll ride the wave and chips will fall where they fall, but there's one thing, and anyone who knows Nick McGrath, they know that when I'm given the facts, they are the facts, and I have absolutely nothing to hide here, and I'm very proud of the job that I feel we're doing as a government and the decisions that have been made in this case, and I stand by my decisions.
And fair enough. And just one last question as I tried to recall everything we discussed here. When you were approached by the company, and not just in the July request for an extension, but when it came this calendar year and further negotiation on dissolving the contract, who represented Humber Valley Paving?
Gene Coleman.
Gene Coleman was that man, and this was in the form of a phone call?
Yes.
Okay. I appreciate your time.
That initiated the negotiations.
And it was Gene Coleman this March or February that contacted you directly?
That's correct.
And do you know was he in position to do exactly that? Because there's some questions surrounding whether or not he was an owner and or a director at that time. Well,
all I can say to you, Paddy, that we've been dealing with Humber Valley Paving since 1996. Yeah. We've had phenomenal professional work done by Humber Valley Paving. Very pleased with the work that they've done. We've never had issues with their contracts. The circumstances around this particular contract were nobody's fault. There were things that nobody had any control over. Gene Coleman has always been spokesperson for the company, and he was in this case. So
I appreciate your time. I look forward to you forwarding along the paperwork so we can add that into the conversation and give it the weight it's due.
Okay, you have a great day.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Barry.
Nick McGrath, the PC member for Lab West, Minister of Transportation and Works.